On the show today, we have CUNA's very own Brian Donovan talking about the recent NCUA board meeting, CFPB's debt collection rule, a credit union bank skirmish brewing regarding the National Defense Authorization Act, and cannabis baking. We got a full plate for you, so check it out. Welcome to our show, and on today's program, we are graced by the presence of Mr. Brian Donovan from CUNA, Chief Advocacy Officer. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing great. We are in the spoils of the last day. Actually, no, it's not summer anytime. It's fall now.
We've made it to fall.
Yeah, congratulations.
Still wearing my summer suit. It's a little warm here in Washington.
That's what I heard. Well, it's lucky for you guys. Good. Summertime is still in full bloom. All right. Hey, we're also talking about today the recent NCUA board meeting last week, and then we're going to talk about some things going on with the NDAA too as well. So last week, obviously, NCUA board met and finalized some rules on payday loan alternative program, supervisory committee audits, and federal bylaws. So what were your overall thoughts on last week's board meeting? What did you get from it?
Well, I don't know that there were that many surprises. You know, the NCUA had put out these proposals, and we'd had a chance to comment on them. So I think the outcome, we kind of knew what to expect, and we're very pleased with all three decisions. Certainly the bylaws and the supervisory committee actions provide some regulatory relief for credit unions, and then the payday alternative loan program is a product that NCUA continues to try to improve. They've made some changes to it to hopefully make it a little bit easier for credit unions to offer these loans. There's probably more work that needs to be done over the next couple of years to make sure that the program remains consistent with what consumers need going forward. But as I've always said, Mike, you know this as well as anything, advocacy is a process, not an event. Indeed. So we'll take this and we'll work with it, and then we'll continue to engage with the agency to see where there may be opportunities to make more improvements.
Indeed. So the comment period just closed on the CFPB's debt collection rule as well. Yeah. So what are your concerns regarding the rule, and what do you think the CFPB is going to end up doing here?
Yeah, well, this is actually one of the more important rulemakings I think the CFPB is going to undertake this year, and it may be one that might have slipped under the radar screen for some credit unions, because what the CFPB is intending to do here is, for the first time in 42 years, establish a rulemaking regime for third-party debt collection. And you could look at that and you could say, well, credit unions are first-party debt collectors, so this doesn't impact us. But It's really important for credit unions to pay attention to this process as the CFPB moves to finalize the rule, because a number of credit unions retain third-party debt collectors to collect debts, and so the firms and the companies that they retain are going to be impacted by that, and that might have indirect impact on credit unions. But there was a provision, or a footnote actually, in the proposal that references UDAP, the Unfair, Deceptive, and Abusive Practices standard, and that has the potential to convey some of the standards to first-party collectors. It certainly could in a different under a different CFPB director. And so we wrote a comment letter on this rulemaking that urged the Bureau to clarify that it is not their intent to cover first-party collectors on this. And then we also commented on a number of the provisions that affect third-party collectors. And what we essentially urge the Bureau to do is let's not disrupt what is taking place in the market right now in terms of third-party collection. It's really important that there be a rulemaking here. As I mentioned, it's the first rulemaking in 42 years, and that should provide some clarity to all of the market participants.
Well overdue, it sounds like. Right.
And so we've had a number of our leagues that have talked to the Bureau about this, and we're going to continue to engage between now and when they finalize the rule.
Sounds good. And when is it? What's the timeline on the finalization? Do we know?
It's always hard to tell. There were thousands of comments were submitted on this, so it's going to take time to go through this. If you held a gun to my head right now, I'd probably say sometime next year.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll keep an eye on that timeline for sure. All right. Lastly, there seems to be a new credit union bank skirmish brewing regarding the National Defense Authorization Act, which was kind of brought to my attention a couple of weeks ago when I spoke to the folks at the California Nevada Credit Union League. So this has been on my radar, and like, hey, let's talk about it. So then this specifically allows banks to have rent-free access on military bases nationwide. So what are your thoughts on this? What's going on?
Well, listen, here's the thing. This is an issue that's coming up on a defense bill, but it should probably be an issue that should be discussed in the Banking Committee or the Financial Services Committee.
Completely.
You have a situation where banks are trying to get rent-free access to military bases, and that what they're essentially saying is, well, credit unions are able to access military bases rent-free, so should we. Mm-hmm. What they ignore is why credit unions have, in certain circumstances, rent-free access to federal facilities. This isn't something that just came up in the last several years. In fact, it's a provision that has its origins in the early versions of the Federal Credit Union Act. And the idea in the 1930s, and it was reaffirmed in 1959, mm-hmm. was that credit unions are federal instrumentalities. That is, and what that means is that Congress has given credit unions a job to promote thrift and provide access to credit for provident purposes. And, the Congresses in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, all the way up to the present day have encouraged credit unions to serve federal government employees. And so what better way to serve federal government employees than to have the facilities located where
right there. Mm-hmm.
the federal government employees work? Mm-hmm. And so from the beginning, there has been this provision in the Federal Credit Union Act that has permitted rent-free access to federal facilities. And that's what the banks are hinging their request to Congress on, is that, well, the credit unions can do it, so should we. Right. The question you got to ask yourself is, do you really want Wells Fargo and Bank of America on military bases? And if you do you want them there rent-free? Right. Credit unions are serving a purpose. They're there to serve the servicemen and women and all federal government employees on these facilities, and they're doing so at the behest of Congress. So we don't think that the law should change. Now that's the policy argument. Where we stand right now is that the House and the Senate have produced and passed different versions of the National Defense Authorization Act. And the Senate version has a provision that would permit banks to serve on these bases rent-free. Mm-hmm. The House doesn't. And so we are trying to work within the conference committee so that the House position on this prevails. And it's complicated because the conference process is pretty opaque. It's hard to influence. But we've had, between last week and this week, with the Hike the Hill program, we'll mm-hmm. have more than 1,000 credit union advocates on the ground, mm-hmm. and we're making our best case. What's the timeline on this as well? Because this sounds like something that could be addressed at GAC too, right? Well, it'll probably be done before GAC. Okay. The conference committee is meeting right now. The expectation is that they'd like to come to an agreement before the end of this week mm-hmm. on the report. But then there's going to be a congressional recess, so the opportunity to act on it won't take place really until October. That's if they can get agreement this week. Okay. So sometime this fall is probably a more realistic timeline. So what can credit unions do here? Because on the surface, it sounds like a fair argument. But like you pointed out, though, there's a lot more to it than meets the eye, like a lot of things that go on. So what can credit unions do to kind of educate their representatives in this area? Well, I think one of the things is we've issued an action alert asking credit unions to contact the representatives, and it's a really nuanced thing we're asking for, because what we want the representatives to do is to talk to the leadership of the Armed Services Committee. So Adam Smith and Mac Thornberry from the House of Representatives, James Inhofe and Jack Reed in the Senate mm-hmm. Armed Services Committee, and really deliver the message that this provision doesn't belong in this act. If Congress wants to look at this issue more broadly, then it's probably in the jurisdiction of either the Banking Committee or the Government Reform and Oversight Committee. But let's have some hearings and let's really examine this if this is the direction Congress wants to go. Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Yeah, it sounds like this is total agreement with you, Mr. Ryan Donovan, for sure. All right, sir, I know you got a lot on your plate, but anything else to wrap up here? Because that's a lot right there. Yeah, the only other thing that I would add is, Mike, we're really close in the House to having a historic vote on cannabis banking, on the SAFE Act. And we've worked on that for several years. We've had Rachel Pross has testified before Congress twice this year on it, and we've still got a number of steps in the process to go, but getting a strong vote in the House of Representatives this week would sure be helpful. Yeah. So we appreciate all the credit unions that have been a part of that process along, and we've had help from several leagues as well. We'll hopefully get it across the finish line here in the House, and then we'll go to work in earnest in the Senate. Indeed.
Yeah, Rachel's been a rock star for sure. So kudos to her for stepping up in that area. So good stuff. All right, Ryan. Well, I'll let you get back to work. Appreciate the time as always. You knocked it out of the park once again.
All righty, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. Anytime, sir.